Okay, so this is the first lesson on polynomials, and hopefully this isn't how you feel, but I'm sure you might by the end of this unit. We're going to be looking at polynomials, meaning we're not restricted to just simply quadratics, things to the power of 2, or things to the power of 1. In fact, in this chapter, we will deal with x to the 4th, x to the 5th, even as high as x to the 8th. And how can we deal with them? How can we factor them? How can we graph them? How do we multiply them? And looking at all those different avenues that even we looked in the last chapter, but not just limiting it to just the x squareds. So to start with, if I was to ask you to multiply this question, in fact, if I was to ask you to do this last year, you could do it just fine. But let's be honest, when you're doing that, you would have shown every single step. And I'm going to walk you through that. And then my hope is that in the end, you'll see how we can actually do this in a simpler way. If you would have done x squared times x squared, which is x to the 4th, then you would have done x squared to every term in this lovely thing. So you'd have had 5x cubed, and then 4x squared. And then you would have taken the next term, 3x, and you would have done it to each of the terms. So that would have been 3x cubed, and then 15x squared, and then 12x. Sorry, I forgot my square there. And then 12x. It certainly would have messed me up later. Then you would have done the 2 all the way through, and so you'd have had 2x squared, and 10x, and then 8. And from there, you would then combine your things together. So you'd have x to the 4th, and then you'd say, okay, that's 5x cubed, and 3x cubed, and 2x cubed. You need, oh, it's not 2, sorry, just the 5 and the 3, 8x cubed. And then you had 4x squared, and 15x squared, which makes 19, plus 2 more makes 21x squared. Then you take all your x terms, and so you'd have 12x and 10x, which is 22x. Plus 8. Sorry, it's not putting on there. All right, but let me just show you another way to do this. So I'm going to quickly just kind of erase this here. I don't want to erase all the work that I have below because I want you to see how similar this is. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this without you being able to see my hands, but let's work through this here. The x squared to the x squared, that part hasn't changed. That will always, I shouldn't say always, but typically if you have these written in descending order, both of the factors that is, when you multiply them, you'll always get the highest power to start with. It does help to have these written in some sort of order, whether it's ascending or descending. Typically, descending helps. Okay, so now I'm going to do the x squared to the 5x. That has not changed. So I'm going to do x squared to 5x. Now, if you'll notice, that gives me 5x cubed. Okay, those two right there give me 5x cubed. And you're going to have to pardon me as I try to do this without having you see my hands. So, all right, so you have 5x cubed. Now, if I, stop with that x squared and I move inward, in other words, I look at 3x. So all I've done is if you could take the hand that's on the x squared and the hand that's on the 5x and move each of them in one term. So you go in one term. So you go from the 5x, you go into the x squared, and from the x squared, you're going to go into that will group your next x cubed term. So you would have your 5x cubed and your 3x cubed. And you see how they together, right away, I can write 8x cubed. Okay, let's do this very similar process here again to get to the next term. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my x squared. I'm going to go to the end. Okay, and that gives me 4x squared. Again, if I move in each hand, my right hand goes to the 5x, and my left hand goes to the 3x, and I multiply those together, that gives me 15x squared, my other x squared term. And then I can move in again. You see, the parentheses are kind of like a stopping block. I can move in one more time so that I have the x squared and the 2 that I'm going to multiply, and you get the other x squared term. If you look, 4x squared, 15x squared, and 2x squared, In your older one, on the first time we did it, it was right there in your terms. And so you did it. I'm just showing you how to do this mentally so we can actually go 21x squared. All right, let me show you another. Okay, we're going to do this again and again and again. All right, let's do the next one. So now, x squared, he has gone to everybody in that term. So we're done with him. He's done. Go back to your 3x. Go all the way to the end, because whether you realize it or not, we've already done 3x times x squared. We've already done 3x times 5x. We're going to skip right to the end. And that's what you'll do from here on. So now we've got 3x times the 4, so that gives me 12x. Now, just like we've done every other time, we're going to move in one term. So we're going to be at the 5x and the 2. We're going to multiply them. Gives you 10x. You might say, why can't I move into the x squared? Well, the parentheses on the left side prevents me from going to another term. It's got to be equal on each side. So it's just 12x and 10x, which makes my 22x. And just for the last term, I just want to show you how that works to wrap this up. So now I'm going to go 2. So 3x, he's gone, everybody now. 2 goes right to the end. 2 times 4 is 8. And you'll notice, again, on the left side, that parentheses prevents me from going on any further. And you'll notice, same exact answer, but I was able to do it in my head with a lot less work. This will be slow to start, but I promise you, if you practice this, and I mean you actually do it like this on your homework, not just when I'm watching you, but you actually practice this, you'll see that it will work every time. So let's do the next one. X squared times x squared, that's going to give me my highest term. X squared times the 3, that gives me 3x squared. I'm going to move in one term, 3x, I'm going to move into the x squared, and then I've got 2x. And those two gives me 2x cubed. Notice the parentheses prevents me on the right from going in another term. So those are my only x squared terms. I wrote that funny, sorry. Did I do that wrong? No, I just wrote this as a squared and it should be a cubed. 3x cubed and a 2x cubed makes 5x cubed. Good. Okay, here we go. Now, x squared to the last term. That gives me 4x squared. I'm going to move in one term. So I'm going to be at 3x and the 2x. Together gives me 6x squared. I'm going to move in one term again. That gives me 5x squared. Combine those together gives me 15x squared. All right, so now x squared, he's gone to everybody. He's done. 2x goes right to the end. It gives me 8x. Move in one term, 15x. Together, 23x. And then last but not least, I've now done the x squared to every term. I've done the 2x to every term. I'm going to go 5 times 4, 20. And there is what that polynomial equals. Great, so let's do another one. X, and they don't have to be exactly the same. You'll notice that sometimes you'll have 3 terms in each one, and sometimes you'll have like this, where you have 2 terms. So in this one, so I have x times x squared, that gives me x cubed. X times the 5x, that gives me 5x squared. Move in on both of them, that gives me 3x squared. So there's 8x squared. Now I'm going to go x times 2, and that gives me 2x. I'm going to move in 3 times the 5x, it gives me 15x. I can't move in again because the 3 is the last term on that left-hand side of the factor. So that gives me 17x. Next one. So x, he's gone to everybody. Now I'm going to go 3 right to the end. That gives me 6. And I'm done. Now what about when you have 3 of them like this one here? When you have 3 of them, what I would suggest to you is you group 2 of them together. I'm just going to group these ones here on the right. That gives me x squared. I'm going to show you again. I'm going to go x times the 4. That gives me 4x. Move in 5x. That's 9x. And then 5 times 4 is 20. So now I'm going to do x plus 3 times that. All right, x times x squared is x cubed. And maybe at this point you should go ahead and try and do this yourself, because it really would help you to actually look to see, hey, can I do this? and then come back to the video and see how I'm doing it. So I just did the x times the 9x and the 3 times the 3x squared. That gave me the 12x squared. X times the 20 gives me 20x. Move in, I get 27x. Together makes 47x. And then 3 times the 20 gives me 60. And that was that polynomial. All right, let's do another one. At this point, I'd like you to pause your video. And I want you to give this one a try on your own so that you can actually see, can I do this? And then I'll just have the answer here in front of you. You'll see this one has prevented a little bit. It's not as easy as the other ones because it went from x squared to then the 5. In other words, the non-middle term. You have two options here. You could do a placeholder and multiply through that way. And that works great. I might suggest that, especially since you're new at this. But another way is just to consider all the ways that you could get, each of the terms. For example, x squared to x squared gives me x to the 4th. That part probably isn't the issue. Then when you went from x squared to the 3x, you got 3x cubed. But then you went to the middle and you get 5x squared. Those don't combine. Is there any other way to get x cubed? Well, the answer to that, of course, is no. But let me show you using this place value thing here, the placeholder, sorry. So we've done x squared to x squared and get x to the 4th. Now I'm going to do x squared to the 3x. That gives me 3x cubed. When I move in, I get 0x cubed. So I have 3x cubed and I have 0x cubed. Together makes 3x cubed. Great. Next. Now let's do the next one. I'm going to do x squared all the way to the end. That gives me x squared. I'm going to move in. That gives me 0 times 3x. That's 0. And then 5 times that gives me 5x squared. So I have 5x squared, and 1x squared gives me 6x squared. Then, all right, let's keep moving. We've done the x squareds to all the terms. So now I'm coming back. I'm going to go 0 to all the terms, or go right to the end. That gives me 0, and I move in, and that gives me 15x. And then last but not least is 5 times the 1, and you get 5. And that is how you multiply mentally and grouping things together. The placeholder definitely does help. Now, in the last few minutes that we have in this video, I want us to consider factoring. Now, some of these should be pretty straightforward for you. Hopefully, you're very well versed at it, given the fact that this was what the last chapter was all about. So let's just look at a couple very standard ones. We had x squared plus 5x plus 6. Nothing in common, so we get right to it with the x times the x. And we have 3 times 2, and they're the same sign, and there it is. It's factored. Well, how would that look if I had x to the 4th plus 5x squared plus 6? How would that change? See, there's nothing in common. In other words, there isn't an x squared in all of these, so we can't take that out. Can I factor that as x squared and x squared? Sure. And then 3 and 2, and they're both the same sign. So that's what that would look like. How about the next one? X to the 6th. Well, what multiplies to give us x to the 6th? X cubed and x cubed, and then a plus 3 and a plus 2. Now, is there something that you could use as you're doing this so that maybe if I look at the next one, x to the 100th power, it's not like I have to keep progressing to that, but I can see a pattern in these first 3 examples that might help me with this next one. Any thoughts on that? One of the things that I'm hoping you recognize is that middle term there can help us recognize what that first term should be. In other words, x to the 50th times x to the 50th actually gives me 100. Remember that when you multiply things with exponents, you actually are adding the exponent. Other than that, the plus 3 and the plus 2, that part stays the same. All right, let's look at this next one. Now, it still has the x to the 8th, it has the 5, and it has the 5 and the 6. The coefficients are the same. But what do you notice about this one? Good. This also has an x, so please don't stop looking to see if there's a way that we can factor things out, because we don't want to make things more difficult for ourselves if we can avoid it anyway. And so you'll notice that this is really just the same question as the first one. We just had to factor out the x to the 6th. In a similar fashion, let's look at these here to the right. X squared minus 9. What does that factor into? Wonderful. So how about x to the 4th? Very similar to that. There isn't an x's throughout, so we could do x squared minus 3 and x squared plus 3. And x to the 6th, how would we get that? Similar to the one here on the left, remember x to the 6th, to get that, we're actually using x cubed and x cubed, because x cubed times x cubed is actually x to the 6th. Everything else pretty much looks the same. And now this next one, hopefully you recognize again that there's an x squared in common. Now, I would not suggest leaving your answer like this because you'll never see that. We have to continue to factor it or completely factor it as we move through these. Don't leave something that can be factored. And then this one we can factor out an x cubed, leaving with x to the minus 9. Very nice. We didn't really have to factor like we've been doing. So hopefully that's clear enough for you in this video in our beginnings of polynomials.